I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. I hired a young woman to clean the house while my whole family was out. About an hour later, she called me and whispered, "Mrs. Green, is there anyone else in the house?" I froze. "No, why do you ask?" My heart seemed to stop beating when she replied, "There's a woman upstairs." I started trembling. "Get out of there right now." I called the police and drove home as fast as I could. That day had started like any other Tuesday in Savannah. I woke up planning to clean our 70-year-old Georgian-style home myself. The weather forecast said coastal rains would return soon, and I wanted everything spotless before the humidity made everything feel heavier and dirtier. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a rag, and stood in front of the living room window, ready to tackle the day with enthusiasm. As I wiped the glass, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I smiled seeing Laura Miller's name on the screen, my childhood friend who I hadn't seen in years. Her cheerful voice filled the line, telling me she was just passing through Savannah for a single day and wanted to meet for coffee. "Megan, is that really you? My goodness, it's been forever," Laura exclaimed, her voice exactly as I remembered it. My heart warmed instantly. Laura and I had grown up together, running through Forsyth Park, staying up late discussing our dreams, sharing secrets under the Spanish moss of Savannah's oak trees. How could I possibly say no? But I hesitated, looking around at the dusty surfaces and the cleaning supplies I'd already gathered. "I'd love to, Laura, but I've just started cleaning the house." That's when I remembered Ashley Baker, the young college student who lived down the alley. She was petite, kind-natured, and always looking for extra work to pay for her classes at Savannah College of Art and Design. I called her, and she accepted immediately, grateful for the opportunity. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Green. I could really use the money for my illustration materials," she said, her voice bright with relief. I gave her precise instructions while leaving a spare key under the doormat. "Clean the study, scrub the stairs to the second floor, and please be careful with the old dusty bookshelves in my husband's office. They're antiques and need special handling." I met Laura at the Magnolia Tree Cafe, a charming little spot near Chippewa Square. We sat under a sprawling live oak tree on the patio, sweet tea and pecan pie between us. Laura told me about her life in Charleston, her children now in college, her job as a hospital administrator, her recent divorce. I shared stories about Matthew, my husband of 35 years, and his successful career as a novelist, as well as my recent retirement from teaching high school English. "I can't believe you're fully retired now," Laura said, stirring her tea. "What do you do with all that free time?" I laughed. "Some days I wonder the same thing. The house feels quiet sometimes, but Matthew keeps busy with his writing. He's working on a new novel." My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. I saw Ashley's number and smiled, assuming she was calling to say she'd finished or had a question about cleaning products. "Excuse me, Laura," I said, raising the phone to my ear. "Hello, Ashley? How's the cleaning going?" But the voice that responded wasn't Ashley's usual cheerful tone. Instead, I heard agitated breathing, as if she was trying to contain panic. "Mrs. Green?" she whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely hear her. "Is there anyone else in the house right now?" My heart stuttered. "No," I replied, trying to sound calm while my mind raced. "I'm having coffee with a friend. My husband is at his publisher's office and won't be back until tonight." "What's going on, Ashley?" There were a few seconds of silence on the other end, just her shallow, ragged breathing. My grip tightened on the phone. "Ashley?" I prompted, my voice rising slightly. Laura looked at me with concern. Suddenly, Ashley's voice broke. "There's a woman on the second floor. I was cleaning the stairs and I saw her. She was wearing a long white dress with messy gray hair. She walked down the hallway and disappeared into the last room." Her words were like an ice-cold knife to my chest. I tried to stay calm, but the hand holding the phone began to shake. My first thought was that someone had broken in. Our house was over 70 years old, but we always locked everything carefully. "Did you see her face?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, just her back. But Mrs. Green, I swear she didn't seem real. She was almost like a shadow." I looked at Laura apologetically, mouthing emergency as I gathered my purse. "Ashley, listen to me carefully. Get out of the house right now. Lock the door and wait outside. I'm on my way." I called 911 while driving, my voice cracking with anxiety as I explained there might be an intruder in my home. The dispatcher assured me officers would be there shortly. I tried calling Ashley again, but she didn't answer. Each unanswered ring made my heart pound harder, imagining the worst, that she'd been attacked, or that the intruder had done something to her. The streets of Savannah seemed endless that day, even though I was pushing well above the speed limit. When I finally pulled into our cobblestone driveway, I saw a police cruiser already parked in front. Ashley was sitting hunched on the front steps, her face pale as a sheet, her eyes wide with terror. I rushed to her, wrapped my arms around her trembling shoulders. "Are you okay? Did you see anything else?" Ashley just shook her head, her lips pressed together as if she couldn't bring herself to speak another word. Two police officers, one middle-aged with a serious expression and a younger officer with kind eyes, emerged from the house. "Mrs. Green?" the older officer asked, approaching me with his notepad in hand. "I'm Officer Davis. We've checked every corner of your home, every room, closet, under all beds, even your backyard shed. There's no one here. And no signs of forced entry," added the younger officer. "All doors and windows are locked from the inside, without a scratch or any strange marks." I exhaled shakily, relief washing over me, but the feeling of unease didn't leave. I turned to Ashley, who was still visibly shaken. "I swear I saw her, Mrs. Green," she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't look real. She was like a shadow. I won't go back up to the second floor again." I gently patted her shoulder, trying to comfort her, but a seed of doubt began growing inside me. This house had belonged to Matthew's family for generations before we moved in. The brick walls, creaking wooden doors, and dark corners had always made me feel like they were hiding something. But a woman, I couldn't imagine it. Just then, I heard the distinctive purr of Matthew's vintage Mercedes pulling into the driveway. He stepped out, his tall frame unfolding from the driver's seat, his salt and pepper hair slightly disheveled as always. His face registered surprise at the sight of the police car and me standing with my arm around a trembling Ashley. I walked over to him, took his arm, and quickly explained what had happened. I expected him to be as concerned as I was, to want to investigate, to ask questions about our home's security, but Matthew only smiled faintly, a smile I rarely saw, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He approached Ashley, patted her shoulder, and said in a soft, almost patronizing voice, "You must have been tired, honey, and confused the sun's reflection with a shadow. Our house is old. It has many corners that play tricks on the eyes." I watched Ashley lower her head without saying another word. Something in Matthew's dismissive tone bothered me. I knew Ashley wasn't a fanciful girl. She was hard-working, practical, honest. She had no reason to invent something like this. But Matthew's calm demeanor and logical explanation made me doubt myself. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks, the house settling, or Ashley's imagination running wild in the quiet of our old home. I apologized to the police for the trouble, a bitter embarrassment rising in my chest. I paid Ashley extra for the distress, told her to go rest, and promised I would call her again if I needed her services. She nodded silently, but I noticed she wouldn't look back at the house as she hurried down the street. 3 months after the incident with Ashley, I officially retired from Savannah High School after 30 years of teaching English literature. No more rushed mornings getting ready for work, no endless faculty meetings, no days racing against deadlines to grade papers. Our old house in Savannah's historic district became my entire world, but the change of pace kept me awake at night. Every evening, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the antique grandfather clock ticking in the darkness, unable to quiet my mind. During those sleepless nights, I began noticing strange sounds coming from the attic. At first, they were faint noises, like something small accidentally falling to the floor. I convinced myself it was just the wind blowing through the old windows or the wood creaking due to changing weather. Savannah's notorious humidity could make even the sturdiest structures complain. But as weeks passed, the sounds became clearer, more distinct. I heard what sounded like a chair scraping across the floor, slow and heavy, then light but constant footsteps, as if someone were pacing back and forth. Sometimes I even heard the rustle of paper, like someone turning pages in a book. One morning over breakfast, I decided to mention it to Matthew. I tried to keep my voice steady while buttering my toast, but couldn't help the slight tremor in my hands. "Honey, I've been hearing noises in the attic lately," I said casually. "It's not the wind. It sounds like someone is up there." Matthew yawned without looking up from the morning paper, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He replied distractedly, "It's just rats, Megan. Our attic is old. It's full of stuff. It's mouse paradise." He turned the page. "I'll buy some traps tomorrow, set them, and that's that." The next day, as promised, Matthew brought home some large metal traps, the kind that make a loud snap when they close. He placed them at the foot of the ladder leading to the attic, right beneath the old wooden door in the ceiling of our second-floor hallway. "There," he said, dusting off his hands with a satisfied expression. "Now you can sleep soundly, my love." Oddly enough, the noises disappeared completely after that. No more footsteps, no scraping chairs, no rustling paper. I sighed with relief, convincing myself that Matthew was right. Maybe it was just mice, and I had worried needlessly. But then strange things started happening, things impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I bought a package of spicy andouille sausage from the local market, my favorite for its intense flavor. Matthew, on the other hand, had never liked spicy food. He wouldn't even taste it, claiming it gave him heartburn. I carefully wrapped the sausage in butcher paper and stored it in the refrigerator, planning to enjoy it over the weekend while Matthew was at a writers' conference. The next morning, when I opened the refrigerator door, I froze. A large chunk of the sausage was missing. The cut was irregular, as if someone had sliced it off in a hurry. Confused, I went to the living room where Matthew was reading the morning paper in his favorite armchair. "Did you take some of the sausage from the refrigerator?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He looked up, frowning slightly as if my question was absurd. I felt like trying something spicy yesterday, so I cut off a little piece," he replied distractedly. "It was good, actually. I may be developing a taste for it." I stood motionless, unsure what to say. In 35 years of marriage, Matthew had never willingly eaten spicy food. He even complained when I cooked something with too much black pepper. But I didn't want to argue over sausage, so I just nodded and walked away, a strange uneasiness settling in my chest. A few days later, the sausage had disappeared entirely. I searched through the refrigerator, checked the trash, but found no trace. This time I didn't ask Matthew anything. An uncomfortable feeling like a block of ice began forming in the pit of my stomach. Then one Saturday afternoon, Matthew and I drove to Charleston for a literary event where he was speaking on a panel about Southern Gothic literature. We left early in the morning and returned late at night. When we entered the house, everything was silent as always. I went upstairs to the second-floor bathroom to wash my face and shake off the day's fatigue. But as I stepped inside, I felt something cold and damp beneath my feet. The floor was soaked. Water seeped between my toes, icy cold against my skin. The floor was completely wet, as if someone had just taken a shower. I looked around and saw droplets still sliding down the shower walls, shining under the bathroom light. My heart hammered in my chest. No one had been home all day. How was this possible? "Matthew!" I called, my voice trembling. "Come here, please. The bathroom is soaked like someone just took a bath." He came upstairs, looked around for a moment, and shrugged dismissively. "It must have been the afternoon rain that came in through the ceiling vent, my love." I glanced out the window. The street in front of our house was bone dry under the streetlights. "It hasn't rained today, Matthew," I said, trying to sound calm. "We were driving from Charleston all afternoon. The roads were completely dry." He frowned, looking slightly annoyed. "Then it must be a leak in the old pipes. You always worry about nothing. I'll call a plumber tomorrow." But he never called a plumber. In the following days, the bathroom floor was perfectly dry, as if nothing had happened. I checked the ventilation grate and the pipes myself, but everything seemed normal. Matthew's explanation, though reasonable, failed to erase the growing unease inside me. The noises in the attic, the disappeared sausage, the wet bathroom floor, they all seemed like unconnected fragments, but when put together, they formed a puzzling picture I couldn't stop thinking about. A week later, I decided to clean Matthew's study while he was at a meeting with his publisher. It was his sanctuary, a small room on the second floor with dusty oak bookshelves filled with hundreds of books and old documents. I'd always thought that someday we should donate some of the books we rarely opened to the city library so they could reach people who needed them. That day I stood in the middle of the room, starting to organize the books on Matthew's antique mahogany desk. There were piles of drafts, notes, and papers stacked chaotically, as if he never intended to organize them. When I lifted a heavy stack, my hand trembled from the weight, and all the papers spilled onto the floor. The sound of the falling paper broke the silence in the room and made me jump. I bent down to pick them up, and at that exact moment, a small wooden drawer that had been stuck for years suddenly sprang open with a dry click. I hesitated for an instant, then looked inside. There, beneath a pile of yellowed drafts, was a small hardback notebook with a dark brown leather cover and worn corners. It looked old and well used. It didn't seem to belong to Matthew. He always liked modern, neat things, laptops, sleek pens, and pristine white paper. That notebook, with its worn leather cover and a loose cord binding, seemed to be from another era entirely. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, I took it in my trembling hands and opened the first page. Inside were pages full of handwritten letters. The handwriting was soft, elegant, clearly a woman's. Nothing like Matthew's harsh, angular scrawl. I flipped through the pages, skimming them quickly. They were story outlines, character descriptions, plot ideas. One fragment described a small town on the side of a mountain where a woman lived alone, waiting for someone who would never return. Another mentioned a buried secret with details that made my skin crawl. These ideas, although distinct, had a striking resemblance to the plots of Matthew's most famous novels, the ones that had made his reputation as a writer. My heart pounded, my throat suddenly dry. It couldn't be a coincidence. I knew Matthew too well. He hated writing by hand. He always said it was slow and messy, a waste of time. Everything, from novel drafts to work notes to grocery lists, he did on his computer. I remembered once when I asked him to jot down a restaurant address, and instead of taking the pen right next to him, he turned on his laptop to type it. So whose notebook was this? A secret collaborator? A gift from an admirer? I sat in Matthew's chair, the notebook feeling unexpectedly heavy in my hands. Part of me wanted to show it to him as soon as he returned, I wanted to hear his explanation, but something held me back. I know my husband too well. Matthew always knows how to make everything sound logical and reasonable. He would smile that particular smile that didn't reach his eyes. He would say it was a gift from a reader or an old idea notebook from when he tried writing by hand years ago. And I, as I had done many times before, would nod and let everything sink into uncomfortable silence. But not this time. Something didn't feel right. Carefully, I put the notebook back in the drawer and pushed it all the way to the back, as if afraid it would vanish if I didn't keep it hidden. That night, sleep eluded me again. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the clock ticking in the dark. Matthew slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and even. Around 2:00 in the morning, a slight creaking sound came from the hallway outside our bedroom. It was a small noise, but in the silence of the night it was clearly audible, like an unsettling whisper. I sat up abruptly, my heart racing. I don't know why, but I immediately thought of the small door leading to the attic, the one Matthew and I almost never opened. I slipped out of bed carefully, not turning on any lights, afraid that brightness would shatter whatever truth I might discover. The faint moonlight filtered through the window just enough for me to see a narrow gap in the hallway ceiling. The attic door was ajar. A cold, damp draft descended from the opening, bringing with it the musty smell of old paper and stale air. I stood motionless, my feet seemingly glued to the floor. Fear mixed with curiosity paralyzed me. I returned to the bedroom and gently shook Matthew's shoulder. "Matthew, wake up. The attic door is open." He groaned, half asleep, and got up with an irritated gesture. He put on his slippers and walked ahead of me down the hallway without saying a word. But when we reached the spot, the door was closed, the latch firmly in place as if no one had touched it. I stared upward, searching for any sign, a scratch, a crack, anything, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Matthew turned to me with an expression of tiredness and poorly concealed frustration. "Megan," he said in a grave, exhausted tone, "you've been too tense lately. You aren't sleeping well. That's why you're seeing things that don't exist. Come back to bed now." He guided me back to our room with a hand on my shoulder that felt heavier than it should. I lay down but kept my eyes wide open, fixed on the ceiling patterns made by moonlight through the curtains. For the first time, I began to doubt my own perceptions. Was I truly imagining everything? Was retirement affecting my mental health? In the days following my discovery of the mysterious notebook, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, though inwardly unease consumed me. I began observing Matthew closely, every gesture, every glance, every word. Recently, he had developed a new habit that only intensified my suspicions. Around 10 o'clock at night, when I was already in bed with a book in my hands, ready to sleep, he would announce he needed to continue working in his study. "I need to concentrate a little, Megan," he would say in a soft but firm voice. "The manuscript is at a complicated part. The deadline's approaching. You go to sleep first." I would nod, smiling, pretending to believe him. But every time the study door closed, I felt an invisible distance growing between us, a chasm filled with unspoken questions. One night in early October, I woke up thirsty around 1 o'clock a.m. The bedside clock's second hand seemed to be counting something ominous in the darkness. I reached out instinctively to touch Matthew, but the bed beside me was empty. The sheets were cold, as if he had been gone for hours. My heart skipped a beat. Where was he? I slipped on my thin cotton robe and ventured into the hallway. Perhaps he had fallen asleep at his desk, as sometimes happened when publisher deadlines loomed. I walked down the dark corridor, the old floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The faint light from the street lamps filtered through the windows, casting strange, elongated shadows on the walls. I pushed open the study door gently, but the room was empty. The computer screen was dark, the chair perfectly placed beneath the desk, as if no one had been there at all. "Matthew?" I called softly. My voice echoed in the silence, but there was no answer. I went downstairs to the kitchen, thinking he might have gone for a glass of water or a late-night snack. But it, too, was empty. Only moonlight spilled through the window, making the shadows of the plates on the shelves look like watching ghosts. A sense of unease spreading through me, I began moving through the house, calling his name, my voice growing shakier with each unanswered call. My heart pounded harder, as if sensing I was about to discover something I wasn't prepared for. As I passed the staircase leading to the second floor, I heard a very soft footstep above me, almost imperceptible if I hadn't been listening intently. I looked up, and in the dim hallway light, I saw a silhouette slowly descending. It was Matthew. He was barefoot, walking carefully, as if trying not to make the slightest noise. In his hand he carried a porcelain plate, one from our good china set that we only used for weekend dinners or special occasions. When he saw me standing at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes widened in surprise. An expression of shock crossed his face. The plate slipped from his hands, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, and shattered into a dozen pieces. That sound tore through the silence of the night, making me jump. I looked at the fragments scattered across the floor, confused by what I saw. The plate was completely empty. No food residue, no crumbs, no grease, as if it had been carefully washed. This only deepened my bewilderment. I looked up at Matthew, who seemed frozen halfway down the staircase. "What were you doing up there at this hour?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I thought you were in your study." He descended the remaining steps and began picking up the broken pieces with slow, deliberate movements, as if trying to buy time to formulate an answer. He avoided my gaze. I got stuck on the ending of the book," he said in a strangely forced tone. "The editor won't stop pressuring me for the final chapters. You know how it is. I needed absolute quiet, so I went upstairs for a while. I got hungry and brought up some food." I watched him gathering the shards of porcelain, unable to fully believe his explanation. Something wasn't right. I knelt to help him, our fingers occasionally brushing against the cold floor. His hand, once a source of comfort, now felt like ice against my skin. "The attic?" I asked quietly. "You were working in the attic?" "Just for a change of scenery," he replied too quickly. Sometimes a different perspective helps break through writer's block. I nodded slowly, not wanting to push further. I knew Matthew was under significant pressure from his publisher. The constant calls from Mr. Sterling, his editor, had been stressing him for weeks. Perhaps, I told myself, he simply needed space to think and create. Maybe I was overreacting, seeing mysteries where there were none. But as we finished cleaning up the broken plate and returned to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Matthew was hiding something significant from me. His explanation made logical sense, but the look in his eyes when he saw me, that flash of genuine fear, told a different story. The next morning, the house felt heavy, as if an invisible storm cloud hovered over us. I woke up tired, my head filled with unanswered questions. Matthew, conspicuously avoiding eye contact, rose earlier than usual. I heard him preparing coffee in the kitchen, the soft clink of ceramic mugs, the gurgle of the coffee maker, but without his usual morning greeting or the kiss on my forehead that had been our ritual for decades. He locked himself in his study before I even came downstairs, closing the door firmly. The message was clear. He didn't want to be disturbed. I stood in the hallway, staring at that closed wooden door, my heart heavy with growing concern. Around noon, Matthew emerged dressed in a gray suit I hadn't seen him wear in months, carrying a small weekend suitcase. He paused in the living room where I sat pretending to read, though I'd been on the same page for over an hour. I need to go away for a few days, he announced in a flat, emotionless voice that didn't sound like him at all. Maybe to Atlanta. I need a change of scenery for inspiration. The book isn't coming together. I looked up, genuinely surprised. Matthew never left without advance planning. He was methodical, organized. He always researched hotels, made itineraries, checked weather forecasts. He consulted me about his travel plans, even for work trips. Why so suddenly? I asked, trying to sound calm though my heart was pounding. Is everything okay with the book? He didn't look directly at me. His eyes fixed on the window where sunlight filtered through the dusty panes, illuminating dancing dust motes between us. The idea just came to me, he replied in that same monotone voice. Sometimes spontaneity is good for creativity. I nodded slowly, not believing him for a second. Something was very wrong. The Matthew I knew wasn't spontaneous. He was deliberate, planned, careful. When will you be back? I asked, keeping my tone light. I'm not sure. A few days. I'll call. But just before walking out the door, he suddenly turned and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was stronger than usual, making me flinch slightly. His fingers dug into my flesh through the thin fabric of my blouse. Megan, he said in a low, serious tone I barely recognized, while I'm away, don't let anyone in. Do you hear me? Especially no one from the publishing house. If Mr. Sterling comes looking for me, tell him I went on a trip and that you don't know when I'll be back. His eyes bore into mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I nodded mechanically, unsure what to make of this strange warning. It didn't sound like a simple request. It was an order, delivered with unmistakable urgency. I watched through the window as his car pulled away, wondering what my husband of 35 years wasn't telling me. The house felt different when he left. Not peaceful as it sometimes did when I had it to myself, but watchful, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Matthew had been gone for barely 2 hours when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Mr. Sterling, Matthew's editor, standing on our porch alongside a young woman I didn't recognize. They both looked impatient, with Mr. Sterling repeatedly checking his watch. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Matthew's words echoed in my mind. Don't let anyone in. But I couldn't simply ignore the doorbell when it was obvious I was home. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and forced a smile. Mr. Sterling, what a surprise. The editor didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight into the living room, his expression a mixture of frustration and concern. He was a tall, thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually disheveled gray hair. Mrs. Green, he said in a clipped tone, I know Matthew is home. Please stop covering for him. We need the manuscript urgently. The deadline was 2 weeks ago, and the publishing house is breathing down my neck. The young woman, pretty with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, stood awkwardly by the door, clutching a leather portfolio. I'm Emma Wilson, Mr. Sterling's new assistant, she introduced herself quietly. I maintained my composure, repeating exactly what Matthew had instructed me to say, though the words felt hollow. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but Matthew left this morning. He said he needed a change of scenery for inspiration. He went to Atlanta. I don't know when he'll return. Mr. Sterling's face flushed with obvious frustration. He removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Green, he said, his voice slightly calmer but edged with disbelief. We've worked with Matthew for 15 years. This isn't like him. We've been trying to reach him for weeks. He's not answering emails, returning calls, nothing. This book was supposed to be finished months ago. I felt a flush of embarrassment. I had no idea Matthew was so behind on his work. He'd always been disciplined about deadlines. But what Mr. Sterling said next made my blood run cold. He pointed toward the Hamilton's house, our neighbors across the street. an elderly couple who'd lived there since before we moved in. "Don't cover for him anymore," he said sharply. "Mr. Hamilton told me yesterday that he sees the attic light on until very late every single night. If Matthew is working that hard, he should have the manuscript ready by now, not hiding from us." The young assistant, Emma, stepped forward. "Mrs. Green, we just want to help. If Mr. Green is having writer's block, he should talk to us. The publishing house is willing to extend the deadline again, but we need communication." I barely heard her. My mind was fixated on what Sterling had said about the attic light. We almost never went up there. It was full of old boxes, furniture we didn't need, and decades of accumulated dust. Why would a light be on? And why would Mr. Hamilton say he saw it every night? My heart seemed to stop for a moment as the scattered pieces began to align. The strange noises I'd heard, the food disappearing from the refrigerator, the wet bathroom floor, the mysterious notebook with a woman's handwriting, the empty plate Matthew had been carrying, and now the attic light that apparently burned through the night. Everything pointed to one conclusion, though it seemed impossible. Someone else was in our house. Someone Matthew knew about. I managed to walk Mr. Sterling and his assistant to the door, promising mechanically that I'd have Matthew contact them as soon as I heard from him. As I closed the door behind them, I leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak beneath me. My mind was spinning with questions and half-formed theories, each more disturbing than the last. What was Matthew hiding? Who could possibly be in our attic? And why would my husband keep such a secret from me? I didn't feel fear anymore. Instead, a cold determination grew inside me like a silent flame, pushing me to uncover the truth no matter how painful it might be. I had been married to Matthew for 35 years. We had built a life together, shared everything. Or so I thought. If he was hiding something from me, I needed to know what it was. I went to the backyard shed where the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the cracks in the weathered door. The smell of dust and old oil made me cough as I entered. I searched for the old aluminum folding ladder we hadn't used since we moved in. It was heavy, covered in cobwebs and grime, as if time itself had settled upon it. With effort, I dragged the ladder back into the house and up the stairs to the second-floor hallway. Each step felt weighted, as if I were carrying all my accumulated suspicions and fears along with the physical burden. When I positioned it under the hatch leading to the attic, I felt my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Not from fear, but from a sense of urgency, a certainty that I was about to discover something that would change everything. The metal latch was rusty and stiff. I had to use all my strength, gritting my teeth as I pushed until it finally gave way with a sharp click that sounded like a final warning. I lifted the hatch door, and immediately a wave of hot, stale air descended, carrying the smell of old paper and years of confinement. That smell turned my stomach, but I didn't falter. I turned on my phone's flashlight, took a deep breath, and began to climb. Each rung of the ladder creaked beneath my weight, as if trying to alert someone to my presence. The attic was larger than I had imagined. A dark space full of stacked cardboard boxes, old furniture draped with dusty white sheets, and cobwebs hanging like ghostly curtains from the rafters. The only natural light came from a small, dirt-encrusted window at the far end, casting weak, dusty beams across the wooden floorboards. I swept my phone's flashlight across the space, my heart beating so rapidly I felt lightheaded. And then, in the furthest corner of the attic, I saw it. A small, organized area, like an oasis of order in the chaos. A wooden table, a chair with a broken leg, and an oil lamp burning low, casting a yellowish, flickering light. And there, sitting with her back to me, was a woman. She was thin, almost skeletal, with long, white, tangled hair falling over her shoulders like an untended waterfall. She wore what had once been a white dress, now yellowed with age, its edges frayed and torn. The sound of a pencil scratching against paper was the only noise breaking the silence. A faint, persistent scratching like a small creature trying to escape. I stood paralyzed, my throat closed, unable to speak. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. Finally, I managed to stammer, "Who's there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the darkness and dust. The pencil stopped its movement. The woman turned her head slowly, deliberately. Under the faint lamplight, her gaunt, pale face came into view. Her eyes were sunken, exhausted, but with something hauntingly familiar that made my entire body go cold. My world collapsed around me. My legs gave out, and I had to lean against an old trunk to keep from falling to my knees. It was Catherine Clark, my sister, the face I hadn't seen in 30 years, except in dreams and fading photographs. Catherine, whom everyone, including me, had believed was gone forever, was here in the attic of my house, in a state that broke my heart into pieces. Around her was evidence of a secret existence. Stacks of handwritten manuscripts, empty food cans, water bottles, a dirty blanket on a thin mattress, and a bucket in the corner that I realized with horror was for her basic needs. All the physical proof of a life lived in captivity. Catherine stared at me, her dry lips trembling with effort. She tried to speak, her voice rusty as if she'd forgotten how to use it. "Sister Megan," she whispered. She couldn't say more. She just looked at me with eyes full of tears, silently pleading for a forgiveness I didn't yet understand was needed. I heard nothing but the thundering of my own heartbeat. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks unchecked. I moved toward her like a sleepwalker, my legs trembling, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. Catherine, my older sister, the brilliant, vibrant woman I had mourned, believing she had run away with her editor and abandoned our family. Now here she was, alive, a ghost within my own home. I reached for her thin arm, feeling every fragile bone beneath her papery skin. "Come downstairs," I said between sobs, my voice breaking. "Come down now, Catherine." I helped her stand, her body so light it seemed hollow. A storm of emotions raged inside me, joy at finding her alive, agony at seeing her reduced to this shadow, and fear of the questions screaming in my mind. Why was she here? Who had done this to her? And Matthew, my husband, what role had he played in this nightmare? As I guided my sister toward the ladder, toward the light, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I guided Catherine down the ladder with trembling hands. Her every step was uncertain, as if her legs had forgotten what it meant to leave that dark attic. She moved with the hesitancy of someone who hadn't navigated stairs in years, clutching the railings with white-knuckled intensity. As we reached the hallway, the late afternoon light streaming through the windows illuminated her properly for the first time. What I saw broke my heart even further. Catherine's skin was almost translucent, with a grayish pallor that spoke of years without sunlight. Her once vibrant green eyes, so like mine, were now sunken and squinted against even this gentle light. Her body was painfully thin beneath the tattered dress, shoulder blades protruding like the beginnings of wings. She looked like a creature of darkness suddenly exposed to the sun, bewildered and vulnerable. This was Catherine Clark, my brilliant, vivacious sister, now reduced to a shadow of herself. "Catherine," I whispered, unable to stop the tears streaming down my face. "My God, Catherine." I led her to the living room and carefully helped her sit in Matthew's favorite armchair, where the soft lamp cast a gentle glow on her ravaged face. She seemed overwhelmed by the space around her, her eyes darting nervously from object to object, as if she couldn't believe she was actually outside the confines of the attic. I rushed to the kitchen, filled a glass with cold water, and returned with hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. Catherine tried to hold the glass herself, but her fingers trembled violently. I knelt beside her, held the glass to her lips, and helped her drink, sip by small sip. Slowly, I murmured, watching as she gulped desperately. "There's plenty more." After she'd finished the water, Catherine began to cry. It wasn't gentle weeping, but a silent, body-racking release, as if all the years of repressed pain were erupting at once. She collapsed against me, her thin frame shuddering with each soundless sob. I could feel every vertebra through her dress as I held her. I didn't press her with questions yet. I just stayed there, letting her cry, letting the tears wash away some of the weight she'd carried for so long. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the otherwise silent room, marking time that suddenly seemed precious in a new way. When Catherine finally quieted, she began to speak in a broken voice barely above a whisper. "Sister Megan," she murmured, looking at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "I never thought I would see you again. Not like this. Not ever." I took her hand, squeezing it gently, trying to share whatever warmth I could. Her skin felt like paper, dry and fragile. "Tell me, Catherine," I said, keeping my voice firm but tender. "What happened? Why are you here?" She took a deep, shuddering breath and began to tell me her story. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my heart. "It was that night, 30 years ago," she began. "The night everyone thought I ran away." Catherine had been working as a fiction editor at Meridian Publishing in Savannah. At 33, she was making a name for herself, known for her keen insight and talent for nurturing new authors. Her career was flourishing, and she'd recently been assigned to work with James Blackwell, a promising but difficult new writer. "James asked me to come to his apartment that evening to discuss his manuscript," she said, her voice hollow with the memory. "Said he'd made important changes and couldn't wait until Monday. I was eager, too eager, to see his work. I believed him. But when she arrived, James was drunk. His gaze wasn't that of a writer looking for editorial guidance, but of a predator who'd lured his prey. He locked the door behind her, told her she'd been teasing him for months. When she tried to leave, he grabbed her, tried to force himself on her. "His hands were everywhere," Catherine whispered, her arms wrapping around herself protectively even now, decades later. "His breath reeked of whiskey. He kept saying no one would believe me if I told, that he'd say I came on to him." Catherine fought back with all her strength. She pushed him away, but he didn't stop. In the struggle, panicking, she grabbed the only thing within reach, a small marble statue on his bookshelf, and struck him in the head. "Sister, I swear I just wanted him to stop," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I didn't want that to happen," but the blow had been harder than she intended. James fell to the floor, striking his head against the corner of a glass coffee table. He lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him, showing no signs of life. Catherine froze, not knowing what to do, her mind blank with terror. That's when Matthew appeared. "Matthew?" I echoed in disbelief, though the pieces were beginning to fit together with sickening clarity. "He said he was just stopping by to invite me to dinner at your house," Catherine continued. "But when he walked in, he saw everything." She wanted to call the police immediately, to report what had happened, to explain it was self-defense, but Matthew wouldn't allow it. "He stood there looking at me with this chilling calmness," Catherine said, her eyes distant with the memory. "You'll go to prison, Catherine," he told me. "You'll lose your entire life. Let me help you. For Megan's sake. I'll protect you." I listened, my body growing cold with each word. Matthew, The husband I'd loved and trusted for 35 years had manipulated my sister using my name, my love. He convinced me that hiding the truth was the only way to protect you, Catherine continued, to prevent our family from bearing the shame. He said it would kill Mom if I went to prison, that you'd never recover from the scandal. That night, under the cover of darkness, Matthew drove to the isolated woods near the Ogeechee River with James's body in the trunk of his car. He dug a shallow grave in a secluded spot and buried the evidence. Then he brought Catherine to our house while I was asleep and hid her in the attic. "It's just temporary," he promised. "Just until things calm down," Catherine said bitterly. But temporary became weeks, then months, then years. Matthew had effectively turned Catherine into a ghost, living in secret in her own sister's house. When the police investigated James's disappearance, they discovered he had withdrawn a large sum of money before vanishing. "Matthew spread rumors," Catherine explained. "He told people at the publishing house that James and I were having an affair, that we'd run away together. That story, combined with both our disappearances and the missing money, made everyone, even you, believe it." I remembered those awful days after Catherine disappeared, how I'd cried until I was physically ill, how our mother had aged overnight with grief, passing away just 2 years later, still believing her daughter had abandoned the family. I remembered Matthew comforting me, holding me as I sobbed, all while knowing the truth. "I didn't know, Catherine," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't know anything. I trusted him completely." "The first few years in the attic were hell, Megan," Catherine continued, her gaze distant as if looking back through a dark tunnel of time. "I lived with fear, guilt, and unbearable loneliness. Every night I dreamed either that the police were coming for me, or worse, that I would be trapped in darkness forever." She paused, taking another sip of water I offered. "To keep from going insane, I started writing," she said. "I wrote about the worlds I dreamed of, places where I could be free, where I wasn't just a shadow. Writing became my escape, my only connection to life. I listened, each word like a dagger. I imagined Catherine, once so vibrant and full of plans, huddled in that cold attic, clinging to a pencil like a lifeline, creating worlds on paper because she could no longer exist in the real one. And then one day," she continued, her voice taking on a bitter edge, "Matthew found my writings. I thought he might encourage me, tell me it was good therapy. But no, Megan, his eyes lit up like he'd discovered buried treasure." She described how Matthew had stood there, reading her pages with growing excitement. "He said, 'Catherine, you have talent. Write for me. I will be your voice to the world.'" I felt physically sick as realization dawned. I remembered when Matthew suddenly announced he was quitting his accounting job at the newspaper to pursue his passion for writing, a passion I'd never seen evidence of before. Friends and family had been surprised by this sudden career change, but I'd been supportive, proud even, thinking he'd found his calling. But now the truth crashed down on me with the force of a collapsing building. Matthew wasn't a writer. He was a thief who had stolen Catherine's talent, turning her into a literal ghostwriter while he reaped the acclaim, the awards, the royalties. "For 30 years he brought me your old clothes, leftover food, basic toiletries," Catherine said. "He installed that tiny bathroom in the corner of the attic, just a portable toilet and a bucket for washing. He gave me pencils, paper, a battery-operated lamp, everything I needed to keep writing, nothing I needed to escape." Catherine revealed that she'd tried many times to stop, to turn herself into the police. She couldn't bear the guilt, the feeling of living a half-life that wasn't truly hers. But every time she threatened this, Matthew manipulated her. "He said if I turned myself in now, after so many years, you would be the one to suffer most," she explained, tears welling in her eyes again. He said you couldn't handle the shock of learning your sister had killed a man and your husband had hidden her all this time. He said you would lose everything, your reputation, your peace of mind, everything you loved. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. Tears streamed down my face unchecked. Matthew had used my love and Catherine's love for me to keep her imprisoned for 3 decades. He was right about one thing, I said finally. Learning this has shattered everything I thought I knew, but not because of what you did, Catherine, because of what he did to you, to us. Catherine squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Don't blame yourself, Megan. I let him manipulate me too. I was terrified. I believed that doing what he said was the only way to protect you. She explained that living in secret had become increasingly difficult since my retirement. Before, when I left early for school and came home exhausted, going to bed right after dinner, she could move around more freely in the attic, even occasionally venturing downstairs when both Matthew and I were out. That's why I had to shower quickly when you two were gone, she said, looking down in embarrassment. That's why I sometimes took food from the refrigerator at night. I tried not to leave traces, but I wasn't always successful. Suddenly, all those strange occurrences made perfect sense. The missing sausage, the wet bathroom floor, the mysterious noises in the night. They weren't supernatural. They were the subtle signs of a hidden life being lived under my own roof. I thought about Matthew's books, the novels I'd read and admired. I'd always wondered why the settings seemed oddly outdated, as if time had stopped decades ago. The characters didn't use cell phones or computers. They wrote letters. They waited by landline telephones. Now I understood. It wasn't a stylistic choice. It was because Catherine's world had literally stopped 30 years ago. She was trapped in the past, able to write only what she knew from before her confinement. Those haunting stories about separated lovers, missed connections, and people unable to reach each other across impossible distances. They weren't metaphors. They were cries for help. Catherine took my hands in hers, her eyes filled with tears, but also with a determination I remembered from our youth. Sister Megan, she said, her voice stronger now. I can't live like this anymore. I have paid for my mistake for 30 years in this prison. Now I want to face real justice. I want to turn myself in. Her words cut through me like a final terrible blow, slicing the last threads of hope I'd been clinging to. I had lost her once when I thought she had abandoned us. I couldn't bear to lose her again, not to a prison cell. But looking into her eyes, I saw this wasn't about what I wanted or needed. This was what Catherine needed. The truth, freedom from shadows, no matter the consequences. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I nodded, squeezing her hands. Okay, Catherine, I said, my voice catching. I'll take you to the police station. We'll face this together. I embraced her, feeling her fragile body in my arms. My heart was heavy with sorrow, but there was also a flicker of hope that even after 30 years, I might help my sister reclaim some small measure of dignity and freedom. We spent that night talking, neither of us able to sleep. Catherine sat wrapped in a thick blanket on my couch, looking both terrified and exhilarated to be in an open space after decades of confinement. I made tea that grew cold as we spoke, piecing together 30 years of separation. Tell me everything, Catherine, I said gently. I want to understand exactly what happened. Catherine's story emerged slowly, painfully, like a splinter working its way out after being embedded for decades. She'd been a rising star at Meridian Publishing in 1993, with authors specifically requesting her as their editor. James Blackwell had been difficult from the start, talented but arrogant, prone to inappropriate comments that she'd tried to ignore for the sake of his manuscript. "The night it happened, I should have trusted my instincts," she said, rubbing her arms as if still feeling a chill. "He called me around 7, saying he'd had a breakthrough with the ending. He needed me to see it immediately. I was dedicated to my job, too dedicated." When she arrived at his Chatham Square apartment, James was clearly intoxicated. He offered her a drink, which she declined. As she tried to discuss the manuscript, he moved closer, putting his hand on her knee, telling her how beautiful she was, how they should collaborate more intimately. "When I stood to leave, he blocked the door," Catherine continued, her voice hollow. "He grabbed my wrists, pushed me against the wall. I remember the smell of bourbon on his breath, the weight of him pressing against me. She fought back, kneeing him hard. He staggered but came at her again, enraged, calling her terrible names. That's when she grabbed the marble bookend and struck him. There was so much blood," she whispered. "I was trying to reach the phone when Matthew knocked." Matthew had come looking for Catherine after she missed dinner at our house. Through the apartment door, he heard her crying. When she let him in, he found her standing over James's body, hysterical. "He was so calm, Megan, so methodical," Catherine said, shaking her head in disbelief even after all these years. "He checked James's pulse, determined he was dead, and immediately started cleaning my fingerprints off everything." Matthew convinced Catherine that no one would believe it was self-defense. James was well connected in Savannah society, while Catherine was a young career woman living alone. Matthew painted a vivid picture of what would happen: arrest, humiliation, our mother's heart broken, my devastation, years in prison. He made it sound like he was protecting me, protecting our family, Catherine said bitterly. And I was so terrified, so shocked by what had happened, that I believed him. That night, Matthew wrapped James's body in a shower curtain, waited until after midnight, and drove to the woods near the Ogeechee River. Catherine sat in the passenger seat, shaking uncontrollably as Matthew calmly explained his plan. "He would hide me in your attic temporarily," he said, "just until the investigation cooled down. Then he would help me leave Savannah, set me up with a new identity somewhere far away," Catherine explained. "But within weeks, he'd changed his story, said the police were still actively looking, that they suspected foul play. Each month brought a new excuse." Meanwhile, Matthew had systematically stolen Catherine's identity. He emptied her bank accounts, sold her condo, and claimed to be acting as her financial proxy. Since they had different last names, she'd kept our maiden name, Clark. Few questions were asked. With careful document forgery and the less stringent identity verification of the pre-internet era, he'd essentially erased her official existence. "He had access to everything," she said. "My savings, my retirement account, even Mom's inheritance that should have been split between us when she died." I felt sick. "How much did he take?" Catherine shook her head. "Hundreds of thousands at least. I was doing well at the publishing house, and I'd invested carefully. Plus, Mom's house in Augusta sold for a good price." The money was another shocking piece of the puzzle. I'd always wondered how Matthew had managed to support us so well on a writer's unpredictable income. He'd attributed it to smart investments and good royalties, but now I understood. He'd stolen not just Catherine's words, but her financial security as well. "But the worst part came about a year into my confinement," Catherine continued. "I'd been writing stories to keep myself sane, just pouring my thoughts onto paper. One day, Matthew found the stack while bringing me supplies. He read them while I slept. The next morning, he'd returned with an unsettling gleam in his eyes. "These are brilliant, Catherine," he told her. "You could be published." At first, I thought he meant he would help me publish under a pseudonym, Catherine said. I was excited, imagining that at least my words could escape even if I couldn't. But that wasn't his plan at all. Instead, Matthew proposed that Catherine write novels that he would submit under his name. He'd recently been laid off from his accounting job at the newspaper and needed a new source of income. When Catherine refused, the threats began. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd go to the police and tell them I'd confessed to murdering James in cold blood. He'd claim he'd been protecting me out of love for you, but his conscience couldn't bear it anymore. Catherine had no choice. She began writing, and Matthew became her editor, conveying what the publishing world wanted, bringing her research materials and books for inspiration. Her first novel, published under Matthew's name, received modest attention. The second won a regional award. By the third, Matthew Green was being hailed as a powerful new voice in Southern literature. The success made him bolder, Catherine said. He'd come to the attic more often, demanding more pages, more stories. If I resisted, he'd withhold food or threaten to tell you about me in the worst possible way. All those nights he claimed to be working late in his study, I said slowly, the realization dawning. He was with you, wasn't he? Taking your work? Catherine nodded. He'd come up around 10 after you went to bed. He'd bring dinner scraps, collect what I'd written, and give me new assignments. The extent of Matthew's deception was staggering. For 30 years, he'd maintained this elaborate charade, celebrated author by day, keeper of a captive ghostwriter by night. And I, his wife, had suspected nothing. There's something I don't understand, I said, struggling to make sense of it all. Why didn't you try to signal me somehow? Leave a note where I might find it? Make noise when we were alone in the house? Catherine looked down, shame evident in her expression. At first I was too afraid, terrified that involving you would somehow make things worse. Matthew convinced me the kindest thing was to let you believe I'd run away. Later, when I realized how thoroughly he'd trapped me, I did try. She described leaving small clues, a book misplaced in Matthew's study with a message inside, a note hidden in the bathroom. But Matthew was vigilant, always checking the house before I came home, removing anything that might alert me. And honestly, Megan, she added softly, after a while, a kind of hopelessness sets in. You begin to believe there's no way out, that this half-life is all you deserve. I thought about the mysterious notebook I'd found in Matthew's desk, the one with the woman's handwriting. One of your notebooks got stuck in his desk drawer, I told her. I found it just recently. That's partly why I started suspecting something wasn't right. Catherine's eyes widened. He was always so careful with my manuscripts. He must have missed that one. As the night deepened, Catherine revealed more about her confined existence. Matthew had installed a small portable heater for winter and a battery-operated fan for the sweltering Savannah summers. He'd created a makeshift bathroom in a corner of the attic, nothing more than a chemical toilet behind a curtain. For bathing, she had only a plastic basin and bottled water, occasionally being allowed to use the main bathroom when both Matthew and I were away for extended periods. The hardest times were the holidays, she said, tears welling. I could hear you downstairs, sometimes with friends or neighbors, laughing, celebrating. I'd press my ear to the floor just to feel some connection to the world. I thought of all the Christmases, Thanksgivings, and birthdays we'd celebrated, never knowing Catherine was just above us, alone in the dark. The realization was almost too painful to bear. And Mom's funeral, I whispered, remembering how I'd stood alone at the graveside, thinking both my mother and sister were gone from my life. You couldn't even say goodbye to her. Catherine's face crumpled. Matthew told me she died. He brought me the obituary, but that was all. I couldn't mourn properly, couldn't visit her grave. That might have been the lowest point, knowing I'd never see her again, Never tell her I hadn't abandoned her. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside, Catherine's revelations continued. She explained that Matthew had soundproofed portions of the attic, installed a lock on the hatch that could only be opened from the outside, and created elaborate excuses for any sounds I might hear. "He thought of everything," Catherine said wearily. "And over time I just adapted. Humans can adapt to almost anything, it turns out, even a cage." But the final devastating truth emerged as morning light filled the living room. Catherine had written every word attributed to Matthew Green. Every novel, short story, and essay that had built his reputation had flowed from her captive mind and hand. 17 novels, Megan, she said, her voice both proud and broken. 3 story collections. All mine. None with my name. I thought of the awards on Matthew's office shelf, the framed reviews, the royalty checks. All stolen, all built on my sister's imprisoned talent. By morning's light, we had a plan. We would go to the police, tell them everything. Catherine would face whatever consequences came for James Blackwell's death 30 years ago, and Matthew would answer for his crimes. No more secrets. No more shadows. As I helped Catherine dress in my clothes, all too large for her diminished frame, I made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, she would never be alone again. The next morning, I helped Catherine prepare to face the outside world. She hadn't been outdoors in 30 years, not since that fateful night in 1993. I found my smallest clothes, but they still hung from her frame like garments on a scarecrow. We settled on a simple navy dress with a cardigan, clothes that wouldn't draw attention. "It might be bright outside," I warned as I helped her brush her long silver hair. "Do you want sunglasses?" Catherine nodded gratefully. "My eyes, they're not used to much light anymore." As we sat in the kitchen sharing a simple breakfast of toast and tea, I noticed Catherine's hands trembling. She kept looking around, her gaze darting from one ordinary object to another, the refrigerator, the microwave, my cell phone on the counter, as if they were exotic artifacts. "Everything's changed so much," she whispered, watching me use the touchscreen on my phone. The last phone I used had a rotary dial. My heart broke again, realizing just how much life Catherine had missed. The internet, cell phones, social media, streaming services, all the mundane technologies that had transformed daily existence. While the world marched forward, she'd been frozen in time, like a fly in amber. "We don't have to do this today," I offered gently. "We could wait. Let you adjust a little first." Catherine shook her head firmly. "No, I've waited 30 years for this day. I won't wait another hour." The drive to the Savannah Police Department was surreal. Catherine sat hunched in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window as if she couldn't bear to miss a single sight. She gasped at electric cars, at people walking down the street staring at smartphones, at the changes to familiar buildings. "Forsyth Park looks the same," she said with relief as we passed the iconic fountain. "Some things endure, at least." At the police station, I asked to speak directly with the chief detective. The desk sergeant, a young officer with skeptical eyes, initially refused. "You'll need to make an appointment for non-emergency matters," he explained mechanically. "This concerns the disappearance of Catherine Clark 30 years ago," I said clearly, loud enough for nearby officers to hear. The effect was immediate. The sergeant's eyes widened, and within minutes we were escorted to a small interrogation room with gray walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. 2 detectives joined us. Detective Jackson, a middle-aged black woman with keen eyes that missed nothing, and Captain Martinez, an older Latino man whose lined face suggested he'd seen it all. "Mrs. Green," Captain Martinez began, I understand you have information about a cold case. I looked at Catherine, who sat straight-backed despite her obvious fear. This is my sister, Catherine Clark. She didn't run away 30 years ago, as everyone believed. She's been hidden in my attic by my husband, Matthew Green. The detectives exchanged skeptical glances. It sounded preposterous, even to my ears. But Catherine began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word as she recounted the events of that night with James Blackwell, Matthew's intervention, and the 30 years of captivity that followed. Detective Jackson took constant notes, her pen scratching across the page, while Captain Martinez occasionally interrupted with clarifying questions. Neither showed outright disbelief, but their professional caution was evident. Ms. Clark, Detective Jackson said finally, these are extremely serious allegations. You're claiming your brother-in-law concealed both a homicide and your whereabouts for 3 decades, while simultaneously exploiting your literary work for his own gain. Catherine nodded. I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. Every word. We'll need to verify your identity, Captain Martinez said. Fingerprints, DNA, and if what you're saying about Mr. Blackwell is true, we'll need to search for remains at the location you've described. Of course, Catherine replied. I can show you exactly where. It's a clearing near an unusual bent oak tree, about a 1/4 mile from the river bend. The machinery of justice began to move with surprising speed. Within hours, an investigative team had been dispatched to our home to document the attic living space. They photographed everything: the makeshift bed, the writing desk, the primitive bathroom facilities, the stacks of handwritten manuscripts. They collected samples of Catherine's handwriting to compare with the original manuscripts of Matthew Green's novels. Another team, following Catherine's directions, set out for the wooded area near the Ogeechee River. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they searched the spot she'd described in meticulous detail. By evening, the preliminary results were in. Detective Jackson called me as Catherine and I waited in a small conference room at the station, picking at sandwiches neither of us could eat. Mrs. Green, she said, her voice carefully neutral, the team at your home has found substantial evidence supporting your sister's claims. The attic contains clear signs of long-term habitation, consistent with her description. And the woods? I asked, my throat dry. A pause. The search team has recovered human remains in the exact location Ms. Clark indicated. We'll need DNA testing for final confirmation, but the preliminary examination suggests they've been there for approximately 30 years. Catherine closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. After all this time, James Blackwell had been found. Whatever happened next, at least part of the truth had been uncovered. We've issued an arrest warrant for Matthew Green, Detective Jackson continued. Officers are waiting at your house for his return. I thanked her and hung up, turning to Catherine. They found him, I said simply, and they believe you. Catherine nodded, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face: relief, vindication, and a deep, profound sadness. What happens now? She asked. Now we get you the best lawyer in Georgia, I replied with determination. I called Olivia Thompson, a prominent defense attorney I knew from my years teaching her daughter at Savannah High. Despite the late hour, she agreed to meet us immediately at her office. Olivia was a formidable woman in her 50s, with a reputation for both brilliance and compassion. She listened without interruption as Catherine retold her story, taking occasional notes, but mostly just absorbing every word. This is unprecedented, she said finally, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. Miss Clark, from what you've described, you have a clear case of self-defense in James Blackwell's death. The statute of limitations has long expired for manslaughter, though technically there's no limitation on murder charges. However, given the circumstances, the attempted sexual assault, your immediate reaction, the lack of premeditation, I believe we can make a compelling case that this was justifiable homicide. What about the concealment of the body? Catherine asked quietly. Olivia sighed. That's more complicated. Normally that's a felony, but considering you were essentially held captive for 30 years afterward, I think any reasonable prosecutor would view that as time served many times over. Your brother-in-law is the one who should worry about obstruction of justice charges, kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, and a host of other felonies. Will I go to jail? Catherine asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. I can't promise anything, Olivia replied honestly, but I will do everything in my power to ensure you don't. You've been punished enough. As we left Olivia's office, my phone rang again. It was Detective Jackson. Mrs. Green, we have your husband in custody. He was arrested when he returned to your home an hour ago. I closed my eyes, a strange emptiness washing over me. Did he resist? No, ma'am. According to the arresting officers, he seemed resigned, as if he'd been expecting it. He hasn't asked for a lawyer yet, but he hasn't made any statements either. I thanked her and turned to Catherine, who was watching me closely. They have Matthew, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. The man I'd loved, lived with, and trusted completely for 35 years was now sitting in a jail cell. I should have felt something, anger, betrayal, hatred, but all I experienced was a profound numbness, as if my emotional system had simply shut down in self-defense. Catherine reached for my hand. I'm sorry, Megan. Despite everything he did, I know you loved him. I squeezed her fingers gently. I loved a man who didn't exist. I don't know who Matthew Green really is, but he's not the person I thought I married. That night, Catherine stayed in the guest room of my house. Her first night in a real bed in 30 years. I made up the room with fresh linens, placed a glass of water on the nightstand, and left the bathroom light on so she wouldn't wake disoriented in the darkness. Before going to my own room, I looked in on her. She was sitting upright against the pillows, her eyes wide open. Can't sleep? I asked softly. She shook her head. The bed is too soft. The room is too big. It's so quiet without the sounds of the house settling above me. She gave a sad smile. Isn't that strange? To miss my prison? I sat beside her on the edge of the bed. It's not strange at all. It was your world for so long. It will take time to adjust. Catherine took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Whatever happens now, Megan, I want you to know something. I don't regret what we did today. Even if I go to prison, even if I never know freedom again, at least it will be real. At least the truth will be known. I hugged her gently, feeling her bird-like bones beneath my arms. We'll face whatever comes together, Catherine. You're not alone anymore. As I left her room, a terrible thought struck me. In many ways, Catherine had been the lucky one. Her prison had been physical, confined to the attic, yes, but at least she had known her jailer. I had been living in a different kind of prison, one built of lies and deception, with walls I couldn't even see. And the architect of that prison had been sleeping beside me every night for 30 years. The days that followed Catherine's reappearance unfolded like scenes from a movie I couldn't believe I was starring in. My home became the center of an intensive investigation, with forensic teams cataloging evidence in the attic, photographers documenting the space where my sister had lived for 3 decades, and detectives interviewing me repeatedly about my marriage and my husband's behavior over the years. The press quickly caught wind of the story. By the 3rd day, news vans lined our quiet street, reporters clamoring for statements, neighbors watching wide-eyed from behind curtains. The headlines were sensational. Author's wife finds long-lost sister hidden in attic. best-selling novelist accused of kidnapping sister-in-law. The real ghostwriter, woman imprisoned for 30 years, wrote husband's award-winning novels. I refused all interview requests, drawing the curtains and unplugging the landline. Catherine, too fragile for such scrutiny, stayed with Olivia Thompson, who had converted her guest house into a secure retreat where Catherine could begin adjusting to freedom without prying eyes or constant questions. On the fourth morning, I sat in Captain Martinez's office at the police station, providing what details I could about Matthew's writing habits, his schedule, anything that might help build their case. "Mrs. Green," Martinez said gently, sliding a cup of coffee across his desk. "I know this must be incredibly difficult. 35 years of marriage, and you had no idea." I stared into the coffee, watching the steam rise. I keep thinking back, wondering if there were signs I missed, but Matthew was meticulous. He created this perfect facade. I looked up. You know what's strange? I can't even hate him properly. I feel empty, like I'm grieving someone who never existed. Martinez nodded. That's a common reaction in cases of profound betrayal. You're mourning the person you thought you knew. Have you spoken with him? I asked. He's not saying much, Martinez replied. His court-appointed attorney has advised him to remain silent for now, but we have more than enough evidence to hold him. The forensics from the attic, the manuscripts, the DNA confirmation on the remains we found, it all corroborates Catherine's account. I nodded, then hesitated before asking the question that had kept me awake for nights. What will happen to Catherine? Will she be charged for James Blackwell's death? Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The DA's office is reviewing the case. It's complicated. The homicide occurred 30 years ago, but there's compelling evidence it was self-defense. And frankly, no jury in Georgia would convict her after what she's endured. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Off the record, Mrs. Green, I think Catherine has served more than enough time for a crime that might not even have been a crime. The DA knows that, too. His words offered some comfort, but my worry for Catherine only deepened with each passing day. When I visited her at Olivia's guest house, I could see the toll the sudden transition was taking. Catherine startled at loud noises, squinted painfully in sunlight, and became overwhelmed in rooms with multiple people. Decades of isolation had left her profoundly damaged. Dr. Rebecca Winters, a psychologist specializing in trauma, began daily sessions with Catherine. After their fourth meeting, she spoke with me privately on Olivia's patio, her expression grave. Catherine is showing clear signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, Dr. Winters explained. The prolonged captivity, manipulation, and loss of autonomy have affected her deeply. She's also struggling with something we call institutional syndrome, similar to what we see in long-term prisoners. The outside world feels threatening, overwhelming. Freedom itself becomes frightening after such extended confinement. Will she recover? I asked, my voice breaking. Dr. Winters squeezed my hand gently. Recovery isn't linear, Megan. Catherine will have good days and bad days. She'll need ongoing therapy, patience, and a strong support system. But she's remarkably resilient. The fact that she maintained her sanity and creative abilities during her confinement speaks volumes about her strength. I spent every available hour with Catherine, bringing her familiar foods she'd requested. Fresh peaches, real coffee, homemade biscuits. Small pleasures denied to her for decades. We looked through old photo albums I'd salvaged from the house, reconnecting her to the life that had been stolen. I read to her from her favorite books, the ones she'd loved before her captivity. Jane Austen, Toni Morrison, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence on Olivia's screened porch, listening to the cicadas and watching the Spanish moss sway in the breeze. In those quiet moments, I could almost feel the invisible thread between us strengthening, the bond that 30 years of separation had strained but never broken. One afternoon, as we shared lemonade on the porch, Catherine asked about our mother's final days. Did she suffer at the end? Her voice was small, vulnerable. I shook my head. No, it was her heart, very sudden. The doctor said she likely didn't feel much pain. I reached for Catherine's hand. She never stopped looking for you, you know. Even when everyone else believed you'd run away, she kept your room exactly as you'd left it. She'd send letters to police departments in different cities, thinking maybe you'd started a new life somewhere. Catherine's face crumpled, tears streaming unchecked down her cheeks. I should have been there. I should have found a way to let her know I was alive. I moved to sit beside her, wrapping an arm around her trembling shoulders. Matthew made that impossible. He isolated you completely. I wrote her letters, Catherine confessed quietly. Dozens of them over the years. Letters I knew would never be sent. I'd fold them into tiny squares and hide them in the attic insulation. They're probably still there. I made a mental note to search for those letters when the police finished with the house. They were part of Catherine's story, testimony to her enduring love for our mother. 10 days after Catherine's emergence, I was preparing to visit her with a basket of freshly baked muffins when my phone rang. It was Detective Jackson. Mrs. Green, I'm calling about your sister. Her tone made my heart freeze. Is she okay? Has something happened? She's been admitted to Savannah Memorial Hospital. A panic attack that escalated into physical symptoms, elevated heart rate, difficulty breathing. Dr. Winters is with her now. I abandoned the muffins and drove straight to the hospital, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived, Dr. Winters met me in the hallway outside Catherine's room. She's stabilized, the psychologist assured me. But this was a significant setback. The DA's office sent an assistant prosecutor to interview her about the Blackwell case, and the questioning triggered an acute stress response. They shouldn't be pressuring her, I said, anger rising. She's not ready for that kind of interrogation. Dr. Winters nodded agreement. I've made that clear to them. For now, they've agreed to postpone any further questioning until Catherine's condition improves. Inside the room, Catherine lay small and pale against the white hospital sheets, an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, an IV in her arm. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but regular. Catherine, I whispered, taking her hand. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on my face. Megan, her voice was hoarse. I'm sorry. I thought I was stronger. You have nothing to be sorry for, I assured her, smoothing back her hair. You're the strongest person I know. She shook her head weakly. I can't do this. The questions, the lawyers, the decisions. It's too much, too fast. In the attic, at least I knew what each day would bring. Out here, everything is chaos. Her words broke my heart. After 30 years of captivity, Catherine was finding freedom more terrifying than imprisonment. The realization filled me with both sorrow and determination. She needed stability, protection from the overwhelming outside world while she healed. I spent that night in the uncomfortable chair beside her hospital bed, watching over her fitful sleep. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would do whatever necessary to shield Catherine from further trauma, even if it meant confronting Matthew myself. The following day, against the advice of both Olivia and Detective Jackson, I requested a visit with Matthew at the Chatham County Detention Center. After submitting to a thorough security check, I was led to a stark visitation room with a scarred table bolted to the floor and 2 metal chairs. When they brought Matthew in, I almost didn't recognize him. Just 2 weeks in detention had transformed him. His usually immaculate hair was unkempt, his face unshaven. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, suggesting he'd lost weight. But it was his eyes that shocked me most. Dull, evasive, those of a cornered animal. "Megan," he said as they removed his handcuffs. "I didn't think you'd come." I studied him, this stranger I'd shared a bed with for 35 years. "I'm not here for you, Matthew. I'm here for Catherine." He flinched slightly at her name, then lowered himself into the chair across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Why did you do it? All of it?" Matthew stared at his hands, now folded on the table. "It wasn't supposed to be forever. At first, I really was trying to protect her. And you." "Don't," I cut him off sharply. "Don't pretend this was ever about protection. This was about control, about theft. You stole her life, her talent, her freedom." He looked up then, a flash of the old Matthew in his eyes, calculating, persuasive. It became complicated. After the first book succeeded, I couldn't go back. We had built a life together, Megan. A good life. Would you have preferred the truth? That your sister killed a man? That I helped conceal it? Our lives would have been destroyed. "Our lives?" I echoed incredulously. "What about Catherine's life? 30 years in darkness while you took everything from her, her writing, her identity, even her inheritance." His expression hardened. "I kept her safe, fed, housed." "Like an animal in a cage," I retorted. "She was a human being, Matthew, my sister. How could you look me in the eyes every day knowing she was just above our heads, imprisoned?" He had no answer for that, just a stubborn set to his jaw that I recognized from our rare arguments over the years, always so certain he was right. "Catherine is in the hospital," I said after a moment. "The stress of all this, the questioning, the uncertainty, it's too much for her. She needs peace, time to heal." Matthew's eyes flicked up to mine. "What do you want from me?" "A full confession. To everything. The kidnapping, the financial fraud, the theft of her work. I want you to make it clear to the prosecutors that Catherine acted in self-defense with James Blackwell, that she wanted to go to the police, but you manipulated her into hiding." He laughed bitterly. "Why would I do that? My lawyer says if I cooperate, the best I can hope for is 20 to life." "Because you owe her," I said, leaning forward. "You owe her 30 years. You can never give that back, but you can at least give her peace now. No trial, no having to relive her trauma in a courtroom." Matthew studied me, and for a moment I glimpsed genuine regret in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "What's in it for me?" he asked flatly. I had anticipated this. Matthew had never done anything without weighing the personal benefit. "I won't testify against you," I said. "I'll decline to speak to prosecutors about our marriage or any suspicious behaviors I might have noticed. I won't give interviews about you or write a tell-all memoir." It wasn't much, but it was all I had to offer, my silence. Matthew seemed to weigh this, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "I'll think about it," he said finally. I stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "Don't think too long. Catherine needs resolution, and so do I." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Megan." I paused, but didn't turn. For what it's worth, I did love you. In my way. I looked back at him, this man who had orchestrated the most elaborate deception imaginable, who had stolen my sister's life while pretending to love me. Your way wasn't love, Matthew. It was ownership. I'm only sorry I didn't see the difference sooner. I left him there, surrounded by concrete and steel. A fitting end for a man who had constructed the most elaborate prison for my sister. One made not of physical barriers, but of fear, manipulation, and lies. Back at the hospital, I found Catherine awake and somewhat improved, sitting up with a magazine Dr. Winters had brought her first exposure to current periodicals in 3 decades. "This is overwhelming," she said, gesturing to an article about smartphones. "The world moved on without me." I sat beside her bed. "You'll catch up, one day at a time." Catherine set the magazine aside. "Where were you this morning? Olivia said you had an errand." I hesitated, unsure whether to tell her about my visit to Matthew. Would it upset her further? But secrets had damaged us enough. "I went to see Matthew," I admitted. Her eyes widened. "Why?" "To ask him to confess formally. To spare you a trial, cross-examination, having to relive everything in public." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think he will?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I had to try. You've been through enough." She reached for my hand. "So have you, Megan. Finding out your whole marriage was built on lies. That must be its own kind of prison." Her insight struck me deeply. While Catherine had been physically confined, I had been living in a different kind of captivity, one of deception and manipulation. Both of us had been Matthew's prisoners, in our own ways. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the hospital, my phone rang. It was Olivia Thompson. "Megan, I've just received word from the DA's office. Matthew has agreed to give a full statement. He's confessing to everything. The imprisonment, the literary fraud, all of it. And he's confirming that Catherine acted in self-defense with Blackwell." I sat down heavily in the hospital corridor. "Why the change of heart?" "His attorney says he's not offering any explanation. He just wants to make a complete statement." Olivia paused. "Did you say something to him today?" "I just asked him to do the right thing for once in his life." I felt a strange lightness, as if a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had suddenly lifted. "What does this mean for Catherine?" "It means the DA has officially declined to file any charges related to James Blackwell's death. They're classifying it as justified homicide in self-defense. Case closed. Catherine is free, Megan. Truly free." Tears sprang to my eyes, tears of relief and something approaching joy. I thanked Olivia and hurried back to Catherine's room to share the news. When I told her, she stared at me in disbelief, then covered her face with her hands and wept. Not the silent, contained tears I'd seen before, but deep, body-shaking sobs of release. I held her through the storm, feeling her thin shoulders heave beneath my arms. "It's over," I whispered, rocking her gently. "It's finally over." But even as I comforted her, I knew this was only the beginning of Catherine's journey. Freedom from legal jeopardy was just the first step. Freedom from the psychological prison that 3 decades of captivity had created. That would be a much longer road. 2 days after Matthew's confession, Catherine was released from the hospital with instructions for follow-up care and continued therapy. The question of where she would live arose immediately. She couldn't return to my house. Not only was it still partially sealed as a crime scene, but the thought of Catherine having to walk past the attic entrance every day was unthinkable. "She can stay with me as long as needed," Olivia offered generously. "The guest house is private and quiet, a good transition space." But Catherine surprised us both by expressing a different preference. "I'd like to go to the beach house on Tybee Island," she said quietly as we discussed options. "Remember how we used to spend summers there as girls? It was always so peaceful." I was startled. The small cottage on Tybee had belonged to our parents, and after our mother's death, I had inherited it jointly with Catherine, though I'd always assumed she was gone. I'd kept it, renting it out occasionally, but mostly preserving it as a memorial to happier times. "Of course," I said, touched that she remembered the place so fondly. It needs some updating, but it's still there, still in the family." Catherine's eyes lit up with the first genuine enthusiasm I'd seen. "Can we go soon? I want to hear the ocean again." Within days, with help from Olivia and Dr. Winters, we prepared the beach cottage for Catherine's arrival. I had the utilities reconnected, the place thoroughly cleaned, and stocked the kitchen with simple foods that wouldn't overwhelm her still sensitive digestive system. Dr. Winters arranged for a local therapist to continue Catherine's treatment, and Olivia set up a security system to keep the increasingly persistent media at bay. The drive to Tybee Island was Catherine's longest journey in 30 years. She sat tensely beside me in the car, hands gripping her seatbelt, eyes wide as we crossed the causeway over the marshlands. "It's exactly as I remember," she whispered as the island came into view, its lighthouse standing sentinel over the dunes and beach houses. "I used to dream about this place. In the darkest times, I would close my eyes and imagine I was here, feeling the sand between my toes, the salt spray on my face." The cottage was a simple clapboard structure painted pale blue with a wide porch facing the dunes. When we pulled into the shell driveway, Catherine sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the house through the windshield. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. She nodded slowly. "It's just, I never thought I'd see it again. It doesn't seem real." I helped her from the car, noting how she leaned on me as we walked up the weathered wooden steps to the porch. Inside, the cottage was much as it had always been. Faded floral slipcovers on the furniture, shelves of beach-worn novels and board games, shells collected over decades displayed on windowsills. I'd added a few modern necessities, a new refrigerator, a television, Wi-Fi, but had preserved the essential character of the place. Catherine moved through the rooms slowly, touching objects with reverent fingers. The conch shell we'd found as teenagers, the patchwork quilt our grandmother had made, the collection of sea glass in a blue mason jar. In the smaller bedroom, the one that had always been hers, she stood silent, her expression unreadable. "I kept it mostly the same," I said from the doorway. "The quilt is new, but the furniture is original." Catherine sat on the edge of the twin bed, bouncing slightly as if testing its reality. "I had this exact room in my dreams," she said softly, "down to the chip in the dresser mirror. When things were worst, when I thought I couldn't bear another day, I would imagine myself here, with the window open and the sound of waves putting me to sleep." She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. "Thank you, Megan, for keeping this place, for keeping a part of me alive, even when you thought I was gone." I sat beside her on the bed, taking her hand in mine. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it. No one can take it from you again." We settled into a quiet routine at the beach house. Each morning, Catherine would sit on the porch with coffee, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. I'd join her for breakfast, then leave her with books or music while I handled the ongoing legal matters related to Matthew's case and the dismantling of our shared life. The full extent of Matthew's crimes was still being uncovered. Forensic accountants traced decades of financial fraud, not just his theft of Catherine's inheritance and royalties, but tax evasion, identity theft, and manipulation of literary contracts. The publishing house was cooperating fully with investigators, horrified to discover they had been unwitting accomplices in exploiting a captive writer. 3 weeks after Catherine's move to Tybee, Olivia called with an update that required a difficult conversation. I found Catherine on the beach, walking slowly along the water's edge, her long silver hair blowing in the breeze. She looked almost peaceful, pausing occasionally to examine shells or watch sandpipers skittering along the wet sand. "There's news," I said as I joined her, removing my sandals to feel the cool water on my feet. "Matthew's formal sentencing hearing is next week. Olivia says the prosecution is seeking the maximum penalty, 40 years without possibility of parole. Catherine gazed out at the horizon, her expression unreadable. He'll die in prison. Yes, I acknowledged. Most likely. She was quiet for a long moment, the waves washing over our ankles. Do you think that's justice? I considered her question carefully. I think justice would require giving you back 30 years of your life. Since that's impossible, this is the closest the legal system can come. Catherine nodded slowly. Will you attend the hearing? I wasn't planning to, I admitted. I don't think I can bear to see him again, to be in the same room with him. I want to go, she said, surprising me. I need to see it finished, to know it's really over. I studied her face, worried about the toll such an experience might take. Are you sure? Dr. Winters thinks it could be traumatic for you. Everything is traumatic for me, Megan, Catherine said with unexpected firmness. Walking through a grocery store is traumatic. Watching television is traumatic. But I can't hide from the world forever. I need to face this, face him, one last time. I saw the determination in her eyes and knew better than to argue. Then I'll go with you. We'll face him together. The courtroom was packed on the day of Matthew's sentencing. Journalists, legal observers, and the morbidly curious all crammed into the austere chamber of the Chatham County Courthouse. Catherine and I sat in the front row beside Olivia, who had helped prepare us for what to expect. Catherine wore a simple navy dress I'd bought for her hair arranged in a neat bun. She sat straight-backed, composed, though I felt her hand trembling in mine. I'd been worried about her facing the media gauntlet outside, but she had walked through the crowd of reporters with quiet dignity, her eyes fixed straight ahead. When they brought Matthew in, I felt Catherine stiffen beside me. He was thinner than at our jail meeting, his shoulders hunched beneath the prison jumpsuit. He didn't look our way as he took his place beside his attorney. The proceedings were formal and relatively brief. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, reviewed the charges to which Matthew had pleaded guilty: kidnapping, false imprisonment, multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. Matthew's attorney offered a perfunctory statement about his client's remorse and cooperation. Then Matthew was invited to speak before sentencing. He rose slowly, his hands shackled before him. Your Honor, I have nothing to say in my defense. What I did was unforgivable. I only ask that the court recognize my eventual cooperation and voluntary confession. His words were empty, mechanical, clearly crafted by his attorney to maximize the court's leniency. There was no genuine remorse, no acknowledgement of the lives he had destroyed. The judge was unmoved. Mr. Green, or whatever your real name might be, since it appears your entire identity has been fabricated, she began, her tone icy. The court has rarely seen a case of such calculated, prolonged cruelty. For 30 years you imprisoned a woman in your attic, exploited her talent, stole her identity, and lied to your wife and the entire world. You deprived Ms. Clark of the most fundamental human rights, freedom, dignity, and self-determination. She leaned forward, fixing Matthew with a penetrating stare. The prosecution has recommended 40 years without possibility of parole. Given the extraordinary duration of your crimes, I find this recommendation appropriate and just. She paused, then delivered the formal sentence. 40 years in the state penitentiary. You will be eligible for parole consideration after serving the full term. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Matthew's shoulders slumped visibly. At 72, the sentence was effectively a life term. As the bailiff moved to lead him away, Matthew turned and for the first time looked directly at Catherine and me. His expression was unreadable, part defiance, part defeat. Catherine met his gaze steadily, her chin lifted slightly. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that their strange, twisted connection was finally severed. As we left the courthouse, reporters surged around us, shouting questions. Olivia shielded us as best she could, guiding us toward the waiting car. But just before we reached it, Catherine stopped and turned to face the cameras. "I have one statement," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. The reporters fell silent, microphones thrust forward. "For 30 years I was erased from the world. Now I am reclaiming my name, my voice, and my life. Catherine Clark is no longer a ghost." With that, she slipped into the car, leaving the journalists stunned in her wake. "That was brave," I told her as we drove away. "Are you okay?" She nodded, a strange light in her eyes. "For the first time in 30 years, I think I might be." That evening, as we sat on the porch of the beach house watching the stars emerge over the ocean, Catherine spoke of her future for the first time. "I've been thinking about the manuscripts," she said quietly. "The ones I wrote in the attic that Matthew claimed as his." I turned to her, curious. "What about them?" "I want them back," she said simply. "Not the published books. Those belong to the world now, regardless of who wrote them. But the original handwritten pages. They're evidence in the case now, but eventually they'll be released. I want them." "Of course," I said. "They're yours by right. But may I ask why? I would think you'd want to forget everything about those years." Catherine shook her head slowly. "They're the only proof that I existed during those 30 years, that I didn't just disappear. They're my testimony." She paused. "And I'm not finished writing, Megan. I still have stories to tell. My own stories, under my own name." I felt a surge of admiration for my sister's resilience. After everything she had endured, her creative spirit remained unbroken. "Olivia mentioned that several publishers have expressed interest," I told her. "Your story, your real story, has captured the public imagination." Catherine smiled faintly. "Not yet. I'm not ready to relive everything for strangers' entertainment. But someday, I'll tell my own story, in my own words." She looked out toward the darkening ocean. "For now, I just want to remember what it means to be free." I respected her decision, knowing that Catherine's healing would unfold on its own timeline. The world could wait for her story. She had waited long enough for her freedom. 6 months after Matthew's sentencing, the beach house on Tybee Island had transformed. What had begun as a temporary refuge for Catherine had evolved into a true home. Her space, arranged according to her preferences, filled with objects that brought her joy. Bookshelves overflowed with new titles she was eagerly discovering. Plants thrived on every windowsill, and her own artwork, watercolors of the beach, the marsh, the ever-changing sky, adorned the walls. Catherine herself had changed as well. Though still thin, her face had filled out slightly, gaining healthy color from daily walks on the beach. Her movements were more confident, her voice stronger. She had made careful forays into the wider world, trips to the local bookstore, quiet dinners at restaurants during off hours, visits to art galleries in Savannah. Each new experience was both a victory and a challenge. The first time she used a self-checkout lane at the grocery store, she had a panic attack and had to be helped to the car. But she returned the following week and tried again, determined to master the technology that had emerged during her captivity. Dr. Winters visited weekly, monitoring Catherine's progress. "She's doing remarkably well," she told me during one of our private consultations. "But recovery from long-term trauma isn't linear. There will be setbacks, particularly as she attempts more complex social interactions." I had rented a small apartment in Savannah, close enough to visit Catherine regularly, but respecting her need for independence. I divided my time between sorting through the legal aftermath of Matthew's crimes and helping Catherine rebuild her life. One chilly November morning, I arrived at the beach house to find Catherine sitting at her desk, surrounded by stacks of handwritten pages. The original manuscripts recovered from the attic, finally released by the prosecution now that Matthew's case was closed. "They gave them back," she said, looking up as I entered. Her fingers caressed the paper reverently. 17 novels, 3-story collections, all returned to me. I set down the grocery bags I'd brought and moved to her side, examining the pages. The handwriting was unmistakably Catherine's, elegant, flowing script that covered page after page. "What will you do with them?" I asked. "I'm not sure yet," she replied. "But I've been talking with Elizabeth Harlow at Meridian Publishing. She reached out to me last month." I was surprised. "You didn't mention that." Catherine smiled slightly. "I wanted to wait until I'd made a decision. Elizabeth has proposed republishing the novels under my name, with new introductions explaining the true authorship." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "You'll finally get the recognition you deserve." "It's not about recognition," Catherine corrected gently. "It's about reclaiming what was taken from me, making peace with these stories so I can move on to new ones." She showed me the contract Meridian had offered, generous terms that included substantial back royalties, a publicity campaign centered on Catherine's identity as the true author, and a complete redesign of the books with her name prominently displayed. "They want to start with The Silence Between Echoes," she explained, referring to the novel that had won Matthew his first major literary award. "It seems fitting. It was always the most personal to me." I remembered the book well. A haunting story about a woman who loses her voice and must find new ways to communicate with the world. The parallels to Catherine's own situation were painfully obvious now. "Have you started writing anything new?" I asked, noticing a separate notebook on the corner of her desk. Catherine hesitated, then pushed it toward me. "Just some thoughts, fragments. I'm not sure if they'll ever become anything more." I opened the notebook and read the first page. "Freedom has a taste, salt and sunlight and possibility. It has a sound. Waves against the shore, wind through curtains, voices that answer when you speak. But most of all, freedom has space, room to breathe, to move, to choose. After 30 years in darkness, I am learning freedom's dimensions one day at a time." Tears sprang to my eyes at the simple poetry of her words. "This is beautiful, Catherine." She looked embarrassed but pleased. "It helps to write about it, to transform the experience into something I control rather than something that controls me." Over the following weeks, Catherine's project with Meridian Publishing took shape. Elizabeth Harlow, a compassionate editor in her 50s, came to Tybee for meetings, sensitive to Catherine's reluctance to travel to crowded offices. Together, they crafted a publishing strategy that balanced public interest in Catherine's extraordinary story with her need for privacy and control. The first sign of Catherine's literary rebirth appeared in The New Yorker, a powerful essay titled "The Ghost in the Attic," in which she reclaimed her voice by describing how it had been stolen. The piece generated immediate attention, with literary critics praising its unflinching honesty and elegant prose. "It's strange," Catherine told me after the essay was published. "For years, Matthew took my words and put his name on them. Now my words are truly mine again, but they're about him, about what he did. I'm still not free of him entirely." "You will be," I assured her. "This is just the beginning of your story, not the end." As winter mellowed into spring, Catherine's reemergence into the literary world continued. Meridian published a special edition of The Silence Between Echoes, with Catherine's name on the cover and a new introduction explaining the true circumstances of its creation. The book shot to the top of bestseller lists, driven by the extraordinary story behind it. Catherine declined most interview requests and public appearances, but agreed to a single, carefully managed conversation with the PBS NewsHour, conducted at the beach house. She spoke eloquently about her captivity, her writing, and her gradual return to the world. "I don't consider myself a victim," she told the interviewer, her voice steady. I survived. I created. Even in darkness, I found ways to exist, to express, to remain human. That is its own kind of victory. The interview resonated deeply with viewers. Letters poured in from around the country, from survivors of domestic abuse and captivity, from elderly people who felt invisible in society, from aspiring writers inspired by her resilience. Catherine read each one, sometimes weeping, sometimes laughing, always touched by the connections her story had forged. On a warm day in April, almost exactly 1 year after Catherine's emergence from the attic, I arrived at the beach house to find her sitting on the porch with a thick manila envelope in her lap. "It came this morning," she said as I joined her, "from the prison." I tensed immediately. "From Matthew? You don't have to read anything he sends, Catherine. You're under no obligation." She nodded. "I know, but I think I need to." With steady hands, she opened the envelope and removed several typed pages. Matthew's letter was unexpected in both content and tone. There were no pleas for forgiveness, no self-pitying excuses. Instead, he had written a detailed account of how he had systematically marketed and managed Catherine's literary career, the contacts he had made, the publishing strategies that had succeeded, the business side of the writing world that she had been excluded from. "He's trying to be helpful," Catherine said, sounding bewildered. "In his twisted way, he seems to think this information will benefit me now that I'm publishing under my own name." I scanned the pages with growing disbelief. The letter read like a business associate passing along professional tips, not a man who had imprisoned the recipient for 3 decades. "It's another form of control," I said finally. "He can't stand that you're succeeding without him, so he's positioning himself as still being necessary to your career." Catherine considered this, then slowly tore the letter in half, then quarters, then smaller pieces until it was confetti. She walked to the edge of the porch and released the fragments into the breeze, watching as they scattered across the dunes. "That's the last piece," she said, returning to her chair. The final tie severed. That evening, we sat on the beach watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. Catherine had been quiet all afternoon, contemplative in a way that seemed different from her usual thoughtfulness. "I've made a decision," she said finally. "About the book." I looked at her questioningly. "Which book?" "My book, the one I've been writing in my head since I came out of the attic. My story." She drew patterns in the sand with her finger. "I'm ready to tell it, all of it." "Are you sure?" I asked gently. "It would mean reliving everything, opening old wounds." She nodded firmly. "The wounds are already open, Megan. They always will be. But in telling my story myself on my terms, I take back the narrative. I determine what it means." She looked out at the darkening ocean. "And maybe it will help someone else find their way back from darkness." Over the next 6 months, Catherine wrote with a focus and intensity that amazed me. She transformed the small second bedroom of the beach house into a writing studio, covering the walls with timelines, photographs, and notes. She worked methodically through her experiences, her early career at the publishing house, the night with James Blackwell, the 30 years in the attic, and finally, her return to the world. I worried about the toll this immersion in painful memories might take, but Dr. Winters assured me that Catherine was processing her trauma in a healthy way. "Writing is allowing her to externalize the experience," she explained, "to view it as a story that happened to her, rather than a story that defines her. It's an important distinction in trauma recovery." When the manuscript was complete, Catherine titled it simply, 30 Years. Elizabeth Harlow at Meridian called it extraordinary and unlike anything I've ever read. The publication date was set for the following spring, exactly 2 years after Catherine had emerged from captivity. In the meantime, the republished novels continued to sell remarkably well. Critics were reassessing the work with new appreciation, noting themes and subtexts that took on profound significance given the true circumstances of their creation. As Catherine's financial situation stabilized through royalties and advances, she began to think about her longer-term future. One afternoon, as we walked along the beach, she broached a subject that surprised me. "I've been thinking about teaching," she said. A creative writing workshop, perhaps. Something small for other survivors. Teaching? I echoed. That's a significant step, Catherine. A lot of social interaction. She nodded. I know, but I've been corresponding with some of the people who wrote to me after the PBS interview. Many of them are using writing to process their own traumas. Domestic violence, war experiences, illness. I think I could help them find their voices, just as I found mine again. I squeezed her hand, deeply proud of how far she had come. I think you'd be a wonderful teacher. In October, Catherine taught her first workshop at a small arts center in Savannah. A gentle introduction with just 6 participants, all women with their own histories of silencing and survival. I watched from the back of the room as my sister guided them through writing exercises with patience and insight, her own experience informing every careful suggestion. Find the story within the silence, she told them. The words that waited when you couldn't speak. As the women wrote, heads bent over notebooks, I saw in Catherine something I hadn't witnessed since before her captivity, a sense of purpose, of meaningful connection. She was no longer just surviving. She was helping others survive too. On Christmas Eve, Catherine hosted a small gathering at the beach house, her first attempt at entertaining since her return. The guests were few and carefully chosen. Myself, Olivia Thompson, Dr. Winters, Elizabeth Harlow, and 2 women from Catherine's writing workshop with whom she had formed a tentative friendship. The cottage glowed with candlelight and the warmth of the fire I had built in the small fireplace. Catherine had prepared a simple meal with my help, proud of reclaiming this ordinary skill. We ate at a table set with care, talked and laughed, and later exchanged modest gifts. As the evening drew to a close, Catherine raised her glass in a toast. To freedom, she said, her voice clear and strong, and to those who help us find our way back to it. Later, after the guests had departed, we sat together on the porch swing despite the winter chill, wrapped in blankets and watching the moonlight on the waves. I never dreamed of this, Catherine said softly. In all my years in the attic, when I imagined freedom, it was always just about escape, just not being there anymore. I never dared to picture a real life afterward. Friends, purpose, joy. I put my arm around her shoulders. You've created something beautiful from unspeakable pain, Catherine. That's a rare gift. She leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture of trust and intimacy that still moved me each time it happened. There will always be dark days, she acknowledged. Times when the past feels more real than the present. But now I know the darkness isn't permanent. The attic doesn't own me anymore. As if to emphasize her point, she handed me a small package wrapped in tissue paper. One last Christmas gift. I wanted to give it to you privately. Inside was a key, the key to the beach house. Attached was a note in Catherine's elegant handwriting. For the woman who unlocked my prison and helped me find my voice again. My sister, my savior, my friend. Tears filled my eyes as I read the words. Catherine, I don't understand. This is your home. She smiled, the gentle smile that was becoming more frequent as healing progressed. And now it's officially mine. And yours. I've had the deed transferred to both our names, as it should have been all along. Whatever the future holds, this place will always belong to both of us, a sanctuary where we can always find peace. I embraced her, overcome with emotion. After 30 years of separation, after all the lies and loss, we had found our way back to each other. Catherine was right. There would always be shadows, always be scars. But there was also this, the sound of waves, the warmth of sisterhood reclaimed, and the promise of stories yet to be written. As we sat together in comfortable silence, watching the endless rhythm of the ocean, I thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought us here. From the darkest captivity to this moment of peace, Catherine had traveled an unimaginable path, and in finding her way back to freedom, she had helped me find a deeper freedom too. Liberation from a marriage built on lies. What are you thinking? Catherine asked, noticing my contemplative expression. I squeezed her hand gently. That the truth really does set us free, even when it hurts, even when it changes everything we thought we knew. Catherine nodded, her eyes on the horizon where the moonlit ocean met the star-filled sky. "The truth is just the beginning," she said softly. "What matters is what we build with it afterward." In the story of Catherine Clark, the woman in the attic who refused to disappear, who kept writing even in darkness, who found her way back to her own voice. In that story, I found hope not just for her future, but for anyone trapped in invisible prisons of their own. Freedom begins with a single step, a single word, a single truth spoken aloud after years of silence. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.